Hi, I'm Steve Simmons, President and Historian for TCMotoringGuild. This is the story of a 2-year search for a figurative needle in a haystack, the needle being a pile of boulders, and the haystack, 2,000 square miles of desert. What could lead someone to spend years looking for a specific pile of rocks? This photo, and an insatiable appetite for automotive history. This is a photo of a TCMotoringGuild event from 1955. Not just any event. This is the first organized tour put on by the club, which was just formed a few months earlier in June of 1954. And this is the only known surviving photo from that event. By the end of 1954, there was talk about a group driving tour to Apple Valley and back. There was enough interest, so March 20th, 1955 was chosen as the date. This flyer was sent out shortly before the event. It reads, "Hi. In spring, a young man's fancy, together with many a duffer's, turn to thoughts of stuff and things. As an alternative to sulfur and molasses, we offer the incomparable experience of tooling, or retooling, your TC up the slab a piece. All of the above drivel leads us, deviously, to the matter at hand. Event, a run to Apple Valley, more of a limp in my case. Purpose, convivial breakfast, prefer mine in the solitude of the bedchamber. Date, Sunday, March 20th. My God, this Sunday? Rally point, McGuire's, 7 a.m. Only yard big enough. By coincidence, the Arrowhead Car Club will be breakfasting at the inn on the same day, and we need a big turnout in order to show these characters examples of the original. Please bring a picnic lunch. We may set up camp somewhere that afternoon." At 7 a.m. on Sunday, yes, that Sunday, 13 TCs gathered at the McGuire home in La Cañada. They departed soon after, bound for the desert. We still aren't sure of the exact route they took, but it was likely around 100 miles each way. Some of the participants reportedly carried their kids in the back of the car, where the top folds down. Not something you'd do today or get away with if you tried, but everyone survived as far as we know. The weather was a bit chilly that day, as evidenced by the number of tops raised and jackets worn in the photo. Lows were in the 40 that week, maybe mid-60s by late afternoon. But before you say that isn't cold, anyone who's toured top down in a TC knows that a comfortable cool can turn into a bitter cold at speed, especially in the mountains and canyons. So we have to cut them a bit of slack here. Arriving in Apple Valley, the first stop was Apple Valley Inn. It was an upscale place. A lot of big Hollywood celebrities stayed there regularly, including Bob Hope and Marilyn Monroe and others. Ray Rogers purchased the inn a few years later when he moved to the valley. They even picked you up from the airstrip across the street in a genuine 1800s stagecoach. When the TCs pulled up to the inn, I'm sure they caused quite a stir before the group wandered into the inn's restaurant for some breakfast. We don't know exactly what they did after that, but by late morning or early afternoon, for some inexplicable reason, they turned off the paved highway and headed north into the desert. Maybe someone knew of a spot already, or perhaps they just noticed a dirt track heading up to a ridge in the distance. For whatever reason, 6 cars landed on top of Apple Valley Ridge a few miles out of town. It was here that they took this photo. The group returned home sometime afterward, covering quite some distance for an afternoon drive, maybe 200 to 300 miles, depending on where they lived. We still don't know who took the photo or how it survived all these years, but eventually it was put into an album full of old photos and club memorabilia, and there it stayed until the day I took over as historian and discovered it for myself. I'd seen a poor copy of the photo before, but seeing the original sparked my curiosity. Who were these people and where was the photo taken? We knew it was taken during the Apple Valley event, but that doesn't mean it was taken in Apple Valley itself. It could have been taken anywhere along the route through the desert. So I started searching satellite views online, and I soon realized how impossible that would be. So I searched for popular hiking spots, off-road areas, parks, anything that might have a pile of rocks like this at its center, all to no avail. I gave up and started again more times than I can count. After more than a year of looking, I mentioned my search to another member, Rob Zuka, who started looking himself. Not to be outdone in the futility department, I decided to start looking again as well. Merely minutes later, I found a recent news article about someone found, shall we say, in a non-living state on a trail just outside Apple Valley. The article had a photo. In the background of that photo was a ridge with a pile of rocks, and those rocks looked pretty similar to our rocks. This couldn't have just happened so easily, could it? Well, there was a nearby address in the article, so I looked it up online and went overhead. Scrolling around, I saw a ridge behind the neighborhood. A bit more scrolling and I noticed a clearing beside a big pile of boulders. I couldn't get into 3D mode fast enough. I started comparing individual rocks, cracks, and any other unique features I could find, and it all looked right. Not wanting to jump the gun, I sent the coordinates to Rob with the message, "Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing?" His reply was the same cautious excitement and disbelief as mine, and one at a time we discussed the similarities before agreeing that the location had been found. The only issue was that while in 1955 this ridge was in the middle of nowhere, the town of Apple Valley had since expanded and now there was a gated community right below that ridge. To get to the rocks, we'd have to get through those gates. And we had to do it legitimately so we wouldn't ruin any chance of the group getting in later. On the bright side, there was only one empty lot in the whole area, and it was the one right below our rocks. Had there been a house built, this whole thing would have ended right there and then. Nothing was certain though, as there appeared to be boulders and dirt mounds in our path that might be impassable. So what to do now? Two things. One, try to find those rocks in person. And two, find a way to recreate that photo from 1955. Additional research showed that the community was run by an HOA. The empty lot was privately owned and the ridge itself was owned by the HOA. So things were getting a bit more complicated. In early 2025, several months after the initial discovery and with more research done, my wife Linda and I finally hopped into a car and headed for Apple Valley. I was hoping to not only get to the rocks, but also to query the local historical society for any old maps, photos, or newspaper articles that might be related to our original trip. The town hall had a historical research room, but unfortunately it was recently placed in storage and therefore inaccessible. But there was a small museum nearby run by the Mojave Historical Society, and it happened to be on the old Apple Valley Inn property where the original group had breakfast 70 years earlier. The inn had been long since closed, but all of the original buildings and cottages were there, repurposed for small businesses to run out of. We visited the main building first, and I immediately knew we had to get the TCs back here for a photo. The old Bob Hope cottage was now the museum. Armed with a print of the original photo to donate, we headed over there and found Brian, a helpful and informative volunteer whose mother, Marcy Taylor, was the president of the Historical Society. He took our info to pass on to her. Departing the inn, we headed up to the ridge to see if there was a way to get to the rocks without disturbing anyone. After a couple dead ends, we drove by the main gate, and to our surprise, it was wide open. Not one to question good fortune, I drove in and headed straight toward the ridge. We quickly located the empty lot, and there, just above us, were the rocks from the photo. It was a goosebump moment that wouldn't end for the next half an hour. We grabbed a print of the photo and started walking. The first obstacle for TCs would be to hop the curb, no problem, but the next obstacle was the boulders and dirt mounds. But as it turns out, there was a way around all that. The only real obstacle was a steep dirt berm between the graded property and the old dirt track leading up to the rocks. It seemed solid, and TCs aren't bad off-road vehicles, so I wasn't too worried. We walked a bit further, and there we were, standing in the same spot our club's founders had stood 70 years ago. After taking it all in, Linda and I worked out where the photographer would have been standing.
Right here. He's like right here, I think.
Studying the original photo and looking around at the scene, we both stood in amazement at how every rock, even the small ones, were exactly as they were in 1955. Even more amazing was that some of the bushes were still there. They were dead and well petrified by now, but you could tell by looking at the original photo that these were the same bushes, the same shape, the same branches. A few of them had actually survived all these years and were much larger now than they were back then. Everything seemed to line up, so I got a photo of the spot, and after a bit more nostalgia chills, we left. Leaving the neighborhood, the gate was not open, so we may have accidentally snuck in. Sorry. A quick visit to the Chamber of Commerce to find contact info for the HOA and the landowner was not exactly fruitful, but we were armed with more information than we had before, so We left town pretty satisfied. A few days later, I got a call from Marcy Taylor. She was curious about our inquiry, so I explained what we wanted to do and that March would be the 70th anniversary of the event, so we only had a few weeks to make it happen. She was excited about the idea and went right to work. Our next contact, thanks to Marcy, was with Art Bishop, who was an Apple Valley councilman. He was a car guy himself and more than willing to help us out. But then it got better. We told him where the photo spot was, and it just so happens that he lives a few houses down the street from the empty lot. That meant we had a way to get through the gates with a line of antique cars. Then I was given the direct phone number to Scott Nassif, mayor of Apple Valley. I called and explained what we wanted to do, and he was as enthusiastic as the others. Not only that, but he was also a car guy, having owned multiple auto parts stores, and he puts on all the car shows in the area. Scott went to bat for us, getting all the necessary permissions, and a week later he called with the good news. This was happening. The local newspaper, Victorville Daily Press, also caught wind and scheduled their reporter and photographer to cover it. Meanwhile, word spread in the club about the photo recreation, and rather than doing it in a single day, as in 1955, we decided on a weekend event. Less than a month later, 7 TCs began their treks toward Apple Valley. They came from as far north as Reno and as far south as San Diego. Our own car joined with the Lowe, Zuka, and Taylor TCs for the big drive through the desert. The TCs of Edgar and Hughes came on their own from other directions. The Buckridge TC descended from the mountains to the east. As the main caravan moved north through the San Gabriel Mountains, we traced the most likely route the men and women in 1955 took. And just like back then, the weather was cold, almost identical to the conditions that day, actually. After a quick desert pit stop for restrooms and snacks, we pushed onward to the east and met up with the others along Route 66 in Victorville. The California Route 66 Museum seemed very happy to have us, and the cars attracted a lot of attention. Then it was on to Apple Valley. Dropping down from the pass, you could feel the history as the TCs once again graced the roads in the valley. We freshened up at our hotel before setting off again for Apple Valley Inn, following the path of 70 years ago. The first order of business was driving up to the grand entrance of the old inn. The signage had recently been removed, but you could see where the letters were. Marcy Taylor and Brian met us there, and we took photos of the cars lined up before driving to the museum at the other side of the property. The cars lined up beside the inn's stagecoach, the same one that used to pick up visitors from the airstrip. Our hosts treated us to a presentation on the history of the inn and surrounding areas, while the desert began doing what it does in the evening, getting cold and windy. A nice group dinner at a local restaurant ended our day, and the cars were tucked away for the night. Sunday morning saw an anxious group of TC Motoring Guild members ready for action. So anxious that we had a rare on-time departure. The Harrison TC couldn't make the trip, but that morning he showed up in a modern car with his photographer friend, who didn't have a TC, but did have several age-appropriate film cameras all loaded and ready. There was a bit of worry as raindrops started to fall, but it was brief, and as we drove to the ridge, there was a massive rainbow dropping straight down onto the ridge we were heading to. It does not get better than that. Arrangements were made previously for the gates to be open, and as we drove through, I thought how much easier this must be than the rough dirt and sand tracks that were here 70 years ago. We still don't know how they found this spot or how they even got to it. No maps or photos of that era that we've been able to find show any roads or trails to this particular area. But before we knew it, we were there. Welcoming us at the end of the road was Marcy, Brian, and others from the Historical Society, Councilman Art Bishop, and Mayor Scott Nassif. A few other car people showed as well, followed soon by the reporter and photographer from the Victorville Daily Press. Ramps were set up, and one by one the cars hopped the curb up onto the dirt.
First one's in. lucky there's not a house on this plot, huh?
Yeah, I know.
The next obstacle was the dirt berm. The best path was found and we began our historic journey up onto the ridge.
All rear tires should help. That'd be very embarrassing.
One by one, the cars made their runs at the berm. Being designed back in the day with trials use in mind, it was no surprise that they all handled it like champions.
Exactly a trivial.
All the cars made it up onto the old dirt track without issue, and from there it was an easy drive to the top. And there we were, 70 years later, perched atop Apple Valley Ridge, right where the cars were parked the first time. The excitement was felt by the entire group, as well as those in attendance, as we placed the cars in the same positions as the original photo. With the drivers by their cars, numerous cameras began snapping photos, and just like that, it was over. History had been repeated, photos had been taken, and now all we had to do was enjoy the moment. Speeches were given by myself, Marcy, and Mayor Nassif. We even took a few silly photos, one of them recreating Pointing Guy from the 1955 image. No one could decide who would play Pointing Guy, so we all pointed. Eventually, it was time to leave, so the cars descended one by one back down the ridge. Linda and I hung around for a few minutes as the last car on the ridge, just to take it all in. It was as hard to believe we pulled it off as it was to believe it was over so quickly. But it was time to go, so down we went. Final goodbyes were said and the caravan headed out of town. Cars split off along the route, headed for home, and that was that. 3 days later, the newspaper released their article, and this event was now in the history books, so to speak. So that's it. A short story about a seemingly insignificant snapshot leading a group of people 70 years later to drive their antique cars a couple hundred miles through the desert. But that's what this club is about, keeping the cars, the history, and the adventure alive. If you'd like to know more about us, check out our website at TCMotoringGuild.org. Happy motoring!